Okay. Okay, you're the host now. Is that working, Katie?
Yes, the only trouble is when I say press play on the slideshow, I can't see anybody anymore. So it doesn't matter, I suppose.
Oh, that's fine. Yes, yeah, sorry, I got rid of everybody.
Or anything, maybe you could just keep an eye out, Lou, in case anyone comments in the chat box or puts their hand up, you can let me know. But like Louise said, I'll take questions at the end as well. So just hold on to those thoughts, write something down if you have anything burning, and we'll try to go all the way through. So if I press play, I won't be able to see you anymore, okay? But that's why I've got to share my screen first. Every time I do it, it keeps okay, here we go. Oh, I might be able to see you now if I do it this way. Right, so hopefully you can all see my screen now.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I've pressed play. Let's just, oh, yeah, it's working. Amazing. Right, can you see yourselves on the screen?
No.
Oh, good, because otherwise it might be in the way.
Yeah.
Right, I'll just get rid of that too then. Okay. Right, welcome everybody. So as Louisa said, my name is Katie. I live in Bournemouth and I have 3 children of my own. They are now 23, 20 and 15. So I've got quite a lot of personal adolescent experience already. I've worked with children and families for over 20 years now, spending 10 of those years as a childminder for primary school children. And of course, I've served in primary and young women's over the years in various capacities. I'm currently the State Young Women President for the 2nd time, which is fab because I love serving the young women. As my interest in mental health and emotional health grew, I studied a psychology degree part-time, and now I'm studying my master's in integrative counselling and psychotherapy for children, adolescents and their families. So when I finish, I'll be able to offer therapy to young people and their families, and I hope to create more resources like this one, where I can help to support parents and their young people. So I've started my own company with this in mind, and it's called Mindful Solutions Limited. So if you want to follow me on social media, and there's some little helpful bits of advice on there. So just to introduce this presentation, one certainty in life is that parenting is really hard, but vitally important. My mission is to support parents and children's mental health. Parenting is the most important job in the world with the most lasting consequences, and the only job like it where we receive no training. Parenting is extremely difficult. It's relentless. It's 24/7. There's no lunch breaks, toilet breaks, sick days, no pay, certainly no bonuses. And most of the time, your children will delight in telling you what a terrible job you're doing, especially if you've got teenagers. And so it's a bit of a thankless task, and we end up second guessing ourselves, wondering if we're doing the right thing, if we're too strict, too lenient, wish we'd done, different things when the kids were younger. Have I given them enough independence or too much? And so the vast majority of parents really care about their children. We really want to do a good job, but we're not always sure how. And so that's hopefully where I'm filling the gap today to help give you some information which might help you as a parent. I'm interested to know actually how many parents we have here, or if we have leaders. Maybe Lou, do you know who we've got tonight? If most of your parents...
We invited parents, carers, grandparents. I know we've got some grandparents on here as well, and leaders as well. So a bit of a mixture, but I think most leaders have children or teenage children themselves.
Fantastic. Yeah. So I really hope that this is helpful for you tonight in lots of different ways. As I provide information and you can support your children's mental health, everything you do makes a difference. So if you're struggling right now, don't feel too discouraged. Every day is a new day. We can implement these things starting tomorrow, and support our children better. So thank you for being here this evening. I really hope you find it helpful. We're going to focus today on adolescent development, looking at how they change in their thoughts, their feelings and their relationships. And then we'll focus specifically on mental health at the end. Okay, so off we go. So there are 3 developmental stages of adolescent development that have been highlighted. And these are, as you can see, 11 to 14, 14 to 17, and 17 to 25. So you can see straight away that this does not map onto the teenage ages of 13 to 19. It starts way before and it ends much later than most people realize, right up until at least 25. Young people's brains are still changing, still developing. And of course, there are gender differences. I think with girls, it often starts much earlier than this, where puberty also kicks in, and it kicks in before the brain development happens. And so then we have an even bigger gap between the kind of chaotic things that are happening in their bodies and the ability to regulate. So here we have the 11 to 14-year-olds, which is starting the engines of adolescence. Teenagers become more emotional, more sensitive to the opinions of others, especially. They seek pleasure and novelty. There's more conflict in families, and there's brain changes happening that are driven by puberty. Then we move to the 14 to 17-year-olds, and this is where they're developing a slightly better braking system, the start of better decision-making and more self-control, start of problem solving and planning ahead. They become a little bit more reasonable and drama is less frequent. But of course, these are massive age ranges we're looking at. And then 17 to 25, and it's called putting a skilled driver behind the wheel. This is somebody's theory. And this is where we have increasing in maturity, more self-regulation. They're better at controlling their impulses and thinking about the consequences of their decisions and resisting peer pressure. So as you can see, there's massive differences in these age groups, and there's a huge time of change for our young people. So that's the main thing to be aware of, that this is a big period of time we're talking about. Okay, so we're going to look at three main areas of development: changes in how they think, changes in how they feel, and changes in their social relationships. So we're going to look through these one at a time. So it's important to start off to know that these changes are happening in their brain. That's where it's all kicking off. The brain is massively sensitive during this time. It's undergoing a huge process of development, and with synapses changing and strengthening and some getting pruned out completely. And so this has a massive impact on their development. Okay, so it's a massive time of learning and opportunity, but they're also very susceptible to risk during this time. So let's look at their thinking, the things that are happening, changing in their cognitive development. So the prefrontal cortex is in charge of decision-making, concentrating, planning, and following instructions. But this is severely hampered by emotional excitement. As we'll learn in a minute, youth will feel really strong feelings, and it tends to override their thinking. And so they'll feel first and think second, if at all. So this system is having a little bit of a break during this time. It's really difficult for them to make rational decisions, and really difficult for them to think through decision-making processes, look at the consequences of things. So it leads to really poor decision-making, being impulsive, and a lack of self-control. This tends to lead to increased risk-taking, of course. Teens don't calculate risk like adults do. They are seeking novelty and excitement, and their emotions will override their rational brain. Right, let's look at how they feel, how that's changing. So during adolescence, the reward system in the brain is highly sensitive and overreactive. And when you think of teens, they're experiencing their highest highs and they're experiencing their lowest lows. So the novelty and excitement feels so good, giving increased feelings of pleasure and reward. So this is why it leads to sensation seeking. And adolescents love novelty and excitement. Everything feels better, and they're very passionate. And so, like I said, their emotional scale is the biggest it will ever be. So they'll have the highest highs and the lowest lows. They're very angry or very sad or very happy, and find it really hard to manage and express their feelings. They find it very hard to control their emotions, so they can be very dysregulated, and we call that being hyper aroused, where they are full of energy, they can't sit still, they're very loud in your face, look at me, or they're hypo aroused and they're very depressed, very slow, lounging about, no energy, they can't get up, crying, it's the end of the world. Okay, so you've got those massive extremes in their emotions. Right, and then finally, we have their social development. There we go, it didn't move. And so how they relate to others is massively changing during this time. So first, I'll begin with themselves. They begin to see themselves as a separate person, and they really are aware of themselves as their own being. They start to really care what they look like and what others think of them. They are painfully self-conscious, which I'll talk more about later. They start to think deeply about the world and where they fit and about their belief system. Many become quite passionate during this age. They become vegetarians, vegans, they campaign about the climate, and they become socially active in society. And so this is them all just becoming aware of themselves as a person and seeing where they fit in society and how they think and feel. Now, of course, their friends become massively important during this time, and they're very influential. Their identity and fitting in is of the most importance to them. So rejection for a teen is devastating. Belonging is everything. Combined with this is a new interest in sexual attraction and the desire to be desirable and form exclusive relationships with others. So this is a massive change if you think of how they are as children. They're really becoming more adult in their relationships. Unfortunately, wanting to impress their friends combined with decreased decision-making skills and increased emotions can lead to some very bad decision-making. And then we look at a family and the changes that are happening there. So this is really where the independence from parents starts. And it's vitally important that they do this separation from their parents. Parents are deeply embarrassing to adolescents. In case you hadn't noticed, we are just so embarrassing. It's quite funny as a parent. They totally reject us often, especially in public, and they can reject our belief system because they want to figure things out for themselves. They have to pull away in order to separate from us and to move out and become adults who are independent. But that's a really painful experience for parents. But it's very necessary. So we need to be as supportive as we can of that process. We need to offer our children as much acceptance as we can. And I'll talk about this again later. We'll let them reject us, but don't reject them back. Always remain available for them, even when they do want us, because there'll be those moments where they do want to talk. And try not to take it personally, but I know it's very difficult preaching to me who it's very hard, isn't it, when they reject us. Okay, so let's look at the whole picture of what I've just spoken about. Okay, so look at these three massive areas of development that's happening for our young people in the brain. So we're looking at the regulatory system affecting how they think with poor decision making and less self-control. The reward system affecting how they feel. So there's increased pleasure seeking and dysregulation with their emotions being really extreme. And the relationship system changing with their friends becoming really important, the new beginnings of sexual attraction and independence from parents. So if we just think for a moment of what's happening to our adolescents, and this is just looking at some brain changes, there's just massive changes going on for them. It's a huge time of change. It's a huge period of new things for them, and they've got a lot to cope with. So while we're also learning about them, we can also offer them a little bit of understanding for all the things they're going through. Okay, so what does this look like during adolescence? Let's look at some of the behaviours we might see. So definitely more risk-taking. They're seeking pleasure and excitement, and they don't have necessarily the capacity to make decisions about what's safe, what's sensible, what the consequences might be. So they're also more impulsive, and they lack the self-control they might have that you might see in later adults post-20s. Increased pleasure seeking, everything feels good, so they want to do things that feel good, and we see that increased emotional intensity with those massive highs and lows. Increased peer influence, their friends obviously so important. We see them pulling away from parents. They're very susceptible to addictions at this age because of their pleasure center in the brain being so sensitive. And then we see them beginning to date. So as parents, we look at this, and that's, I think, quite scary. I think that's why as parents we can freak out a little bit at our adolescents, thinking, there's lots of scary things out there, and it's hard to watch. So one thing I put here is that this is all them experiencing it for the first time. So they're seeking novelty and excitement, they're learning about themselves and the world, but they don't have the experience that we do. And so they're learning on the job. So it's very difficult to watch. So I'll talk later about how we can support them. Right, one other thing I want to talk about is how they see themselves. Their identity is massively changing and becomes really important to them in adolescence. So there's three aspects I want to talk about. So the first is a feeling of being unique. Often they feel like they're the only person having their experiences, and that can make them feel really alone and really misunderstood. They can struggle to see other people's points of view. They struggle to see other people's difficulties because the world is all about them. And they don't mean to be selfish. That is just the stage of their brain development, that it's all about their world at that time. So they feel very unique. The next thing is they feel very self-conscious. They're living with an imaginary audience of people watching them, and you can really see it, can't you? They're so self-conscious, so they're much more conscious about how they feel, about people looking at them, what they're thinking about them, and they're often we think the worst, don't we? Wonder what people are saying about us, what they're thinking about us. So that's really visible in adolescence, and they can be just really hypersensitive to criticism or being embarrassed. They can have attention-seeking behaviour where they kind of thrive, and they might overcome those insecurities by kind of acting up to it, being really loud and performing, or look at how cool I am. Or they want to be invisible, they just don't want attention drawn to themselves. And then finally, there's a feeling of being invincible. And as parents, we can all relate to this, because suddenly they don't want to wear a coat, they don't feel the cold, don't need suntan lotion, definitely, how embarrassing. They can cross the road and they won't get knocked over by a car. So, for some reason, this is just something that happens in their brain, and they have this feeling of invincibility. But interestingly, this is something that mental health specialists have noticed has been a difference in young people because of COVID and because of the war in Ukraine, that some of our young people are they're lacking this feeling of feeling very vulnerable. So it's interesting to be aware of that at the moment, this feeling of invincibility, which actually kind of helps to buoy them up. So lots of them are struggling with that at the moment. So just to be aware of that. Okay, so bearing these three things in mind, let's just consider the impact of social media. So rather than an imaginary audience, they actually have a real life audience watching them. And I can't imagine playing out my youth now with people watching my every move, having to show what I'm doing, and trying to look attractive or cool and have people liking my things. And so think of the impact of them. They have a real constant audience 24/7. They are very influenced by their likes, dislikes. They're very vulnerable to bullying. It's a really vulnerable space out there, isn't it? And they can't escape it. Like we used to be able to go home from school and get away from friends if they weren't being very nice, but they can't do that. It's very addictive. It's very overwhelming because they've got billions of messages coming in, and they have a feeling of being, competing with others as well. And so I think social media is something that we definitely need to be aware of, because it wasn't around before, and look at the impact of that on them. The one positive, or one of the positives of social media, is that it can be a place of belonging. So lots of young people who struggle to fit in with people around them do find that sense of belonging online. But just a word of warning, that it's such a vulnerable space, and they're obviously open to a lot more influence, aren't they? Okay. So I just want to share with you some things which are things to consider, to be aware of, that can affect our young people. These are things that as parents we might need to seek some additional professional support, especially in these kind of categories. And just to be aware of, if you're serving young people, working with them, to look at these extra kind of things that could be impacting them and making life just that little bit harder. So neurodiversity are differences in how the brain functions. That's the simplest way of putting it. And it can create lots of different ways of operating. So we have things like ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, Asperger's, oppositional defiant disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, obsessive compulsive disorder, Tourette syndrome, and epilepsy, just to name a few. And so these young people are trying to survive in this world where their brains operating differently. They can often get into more trouble at school or struggle with the school system, definitely as a whole, the way that it operates. And that can be really difficult for these people that just having an even more difficult time. Trauma can be a one-off big incident, or it could be a history of ongoing incidents. And it can be something that happens to them or something that they witness or hear about. So it's not necessarily something that's even happened to them, but they could see it. And this is where I think, they've seen things on the news. It can have a big impact on them. It's anything that pushes a young person beyond what they can mentally and emotionally cope with. So I always think of the 3 Ds. We have death, divorce, and disease. So those 3 have a massive impact on a child's life. And obviously this isn't in any way blaming this presentation, it's just to make us aware of when these difficulties arise in our lives, that you might need to get additional support for your young people. Obviously we have children in care who have a history of abuse or neglect. But children who've been bullied, there could have been a car accident. So there's all sorts of different types of trauma. And sometimes problems don't perhaps manifest straight away, or they keep them hidden and we think they're okay. So it's just something, again, to be aware of. Families can often obviously have a massive impact on our young people. So we may have multi-generational families. We're very lucky we've got aunts and uncles and grandparents to support us, or we could feel very much alone, be very far away from family, be a single parent, or a parent without family in the gospel. And we could have ill health ourselves, mental ill health. We could be a carer to our parents, our children be a carer. There's so many different things, isn't there, that could be happening in our families. So just to be aware of that and consider the impact on our children. I think there's a fake belief that children are really resilient, and actually it's not true. They're actually very vulnerable. So just to be extra supportive and aware of that. I've got culture and class on here because that has a huge difference on how our children are treated in society, the opportunities they have at school, the way they're treated and thought about in the mental health system, the criminal justice system. And it's really sad, but there's lots of studies that show that our age, our gender, our class, and our ethnicity have a massive difference to how young people are seen and viewed and they're treated. So to be really conscious of this, as a parent, if you've got children who are of an ethnic minority in our country, you're obviously going to be very aware already. But if you're a leader of those children and young people, just encourage you to be aware of this in the way that we talk. Be very careful to value their backgrounds, to recognize if they have a different background. And sometimes it's hidden as well. You might think, oh, they look like me, so they're the same as me. They could be completely different. So just to be aware of that, we're all different. And poverty especially is one of the key indicators of having a really negative impact on children's futures. And so I encourage anyone who's struggling to seek extra help at this time. We know there's more help from church available because of the crisis we're all going through at the moment financially. Okay, we're on to disability. So disability has a massive impact on young people because it affects their identity. And this is difficult, isn't it? Because it helps, makes it difficult to fit in, makes it difficult to socialise, to just join in with the life that everybody else seems to enjoy. So it's just another thing to be really conscious of and to be really supportive of if there's people in that situation. And again, these could be visible things or not visible at all. So just be very sensitive. And finally, our religious culture. I think it's really important to recognise that it can be really difficult for our youth to be religious. When I grew up, it was more common that people would class themselves as Church of England, like on a census or something. But nowadays, I think that's very rare. Most people aren't religious at all. It's quite hard for young people to stand up and be different in such a big way, especially with beliefs that are becoming so different to popular ideology. And so just to be conscious of how that affects them. Within the church, I think we have a strong shame culture, which we hope will just change over time. I think things are gradually changing. And I love President Nelson's Change the Young Women theme, that it now says to cherish repentance, so we're not wanting to shame our young people for committing sin. So I would encourage you to kind of normalize sin, normalize that people make mistakes, because otherwise that's when the kids leave the church because they think they're not good enough, which is just really sad, because that's what the church is for, isn't it? It's a hospital for sick people. It's not for perfect people. And to be open to questions and concerns from them about when our values are very different. So I'm thinking especially here about the GLBTQ community, changes in gender that have happened so quickly, it seems, the last few years. This is our children's world that they're surrounded by, and it can be quite difficult to reconcile some of our teachings with what the world teaches. So I think we just need to be very conscious of that, very conscious of if a youth themselves is having, questioning their identity, and being available and accepting of those conversations so that we don't push them away and make them feel unloved. So to be just really conscious of those things. So I just wanted to pick a couple of topics here just to help highlight some really important things that could affect them, and to help us to be more aware of where we might need to offer young people extra support. Okay, so how can we apply these things that we've talked about? So acceptance is so important. It's one of the key core conditions of therapy, is to offer this unconditional positive regard. And what we talk about at church, isn't it, is unconditional love, and that is so important. And I think as a parent, I often used to parent with disapproval if they did things wrong, because that was kind of how I'd been parented and how I kind of learn about how you discipline. And actually looking back, that was really damaging to my children. So they really need our acceptance and our understanding. They don't need disapproval. It's a really horrible rejecting feeling, isn't it? And we need to offer them lots of patience. So after we've looked at these things and all these things that are happening in their brain and their emotions that they're not in control of, it's not their fault. So be really, really patient with this process. Be patient with the hard times, because they will come out of it. And offer them patience if they do things that we don't like. Just to be quite understanding with them, not too critical. Belonging is really important. So like I mentioned before, and the next one says, allow them to pull away. So we allow them to reject us. We allow them to distance themselves from parents, because they need to do that. They need to do that to be a healthy adult. It's not good to have adults who still need to talk to mum every day and can't make decisions without them, so they need to separate. So we need to be accepting of that, but always help them to feel they belong at home. They know this is where they belong. They know no matter what they do, no matter where they go in life, this is their home. They're always welcome here. So it's really important they feel that sense of safety. That's a really felt feeling, that they know home is safe. So no matter what they do, it's okay. This is their home. Okay, they're very motivated by reward, which is interesting, because I think often people want to punish teens, and that's the kind of natural default kind of way we've been brought up, how to discipline our children. But actually they're much more motivated by reward. So just think of ways that you can encourage good behavior by reward, rather than punishing the bad behavior. I think it's just far more effective, and you're far more likely to have cooperation there than if you just punish them and it just creates bad feeling. Opportunities, exploration and fun. So they do need a chance to do things where they're experiencing something new, they're challenging boundaries, they're challenging their physical abilities, and they need to have fun. Their life, I feel so sorry for them, because their life is school, they've got seminary on top, a lot of them, and they do homework in the evening, and that can be all their life is for most of the week. And so they need things to look forward to, just like we do. They need breaks from those kind of mundane things that they're having to do all the time. So try to find ways of injecting some fun and some excitement into their lives. And of course, they might not want to do it with us, but if you say, hey, I'll take you to, this outdoor activity centre at the weekend with your friends, and I won't come in, but try to provide those opportunities for them. So they do need boundaries. I'm not saying that we don't give them boundaries. Boundaries are really important and actually help them to feel safe. So they push against them because they have to. That's natural. They'll push and they'll push, but they need that firm, clear fair and consistent boundary so that they feel safe. So that's a funny thing. If we become a really lax parent, oh yeah, do whatever they want, they actually don't feel safe. So they do need looking after still, but we bear in mind their age and maturity as we set those boundaries. So it's really important that we respect them as people. We don't talk down to them. They're people with thoughts and feelings, and we don't embarrass them. You know, they are very self-conscious. So although we might not like that they ignore us in public, we need to respect that, and don't embarrass them on purpose, because it's just a bit mean. They won't like you, so it won't help them like you anymore. And then finally, give them the agency to practice making decisions. So if we coddle them too much, they won't learn for themselves. They do need to learn from their mistakes, and they need to have the opportunity to do scary things. So, you know, give them an allowance, help them to practice using money. Get them to, you know, start being aware of how long they're using their phone for and try to moderate it. And they do need help. You know, it's such and such o'clock, you know, should we get ready for bed now? But as we give them chances to practice these adult skills, that's how they'll learn them. They can't learn any other way. We can't teach them by telling them what to do. They'll only learn through practically doing it. So let's give them those opportunities to grow. Not be too scared. I think we can, if we parent from a place of fear, it's not a very good, healthy place to parent from. So, but as we trust them and show them that trust, they feel that trust, they will thrive and you know, kind of become the best selves that they can be as they grow up. Okay, so now I want to move along to adolescent mental health, but there's more a specific focus on looking at their mental and emotional health. Okay, so what does good mental health give our children? The ability to learn, the ability to feel, express, and manage a range of positive and negative emotions, the ability to form and maintain good relationships with others, the ability to cope with and manage change and uncertainty. Now, it really hit me that when you look at those first three, what it's really saying is that good mental health gives our children the ability to think, the ability to feel, and the ability to form good relationships. And that's what we've just spoken about, that the massive changes that are happening in adolescence affect how they think, how they feel, and their relationships. So I just thought it's so fascinating. And that's why during adolescence, a lot of mental health issues arise because of all those massive changes that happen in their brain. So if they don't have good mental health, they will really struggle in school. They'll struggle to concentrate. If they're feeling anxious, they can't learn because their feeling part of the brain is just too active. Their thinking part of the brain is just offline. They can't think. And that's why children with anxiety will really struggle at school. So if they haven't got good mental health, they'll struggle with their emotions. They'll struggle to recognize maybe what an emotion feels like. You know, what is anger? What is sadness? What's the difference? And struggle to be able to express their emotions. So it's really important as parents that we help them to label emotions when they're young. You know, oh, it sounds like you're feeling really angry, and help them get used to that language so they can talk about their emotions and recognize how they're feeling. And then obviously with poor mental health, they struggle in their relationships. So if they're feeling insecure, they've got low self-esteem, or if they've had bad upbringings where they've been maltreated and they don't feel loved, they'll often push people away, or they'll cling too much to other people for attention and affection. So you just see how everything affects everything. And then finally, the ability to manage and cope with uncertainty. And you think about them, they've got, you know, if they move home, if they change schools, all these kind of massive changes, if they can't cope with those, that's really difficult. So those are our four kind of key areas of what we want to support in our children, how mental health will help them if they have good mental health. Okay. So mental illness will affect how they think, how they feel, and how they behave. And it can be a mixture of these, obviously, not just one particular area. But an important message for them to know is that mental illnesses are treatable, just like physical illnesses. So we wouldn't you know, if we got an earache, we go to the doctor and we, you know, want some medicine, and it should be just the same. So we try to get rid of the shame of, you know, something being wrong with us if we've got a mental illness. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's just something's wrong with us inside rather than something's wrong with us on the outside. Okay, so most mental health disorders develop between 10 and 25 years, which I think a lot of people don't realise. We think that that happens as an adult, but actually more mental illness manifests for the first time in young people during their adolescent years. So things like mood disorders, substance abuse disorders, anxiety disorders, impulse control disorders, eating disorders, and schizophrenia, they will all manifest during the adolescent years. Highly likely that's when they'll manifest rather than when they're adults. Okay, so some possible causes of mental illness. So there's three kind of areas of possible causes. These are genetic or neurobiological, so things happening in their body, environmental, things that happen outside the body, and specifically trauma. That's its own kind of special category. So if we just go through these, so genetic predisposition to mental illness, it does run in families. They may have a more neurotic personality, which means they're more prone to worry and anxiety. They may have a lower stress tolerance, you know, which is all different, aren't we, in our bodies, and physically and emotionally have different stress tolerance levels. There may be differences in brain development, and this could be caused, you know, in a difficult pregnancy or, you know, a neonatal child, or just changes that happen during our lifespan. There's so many things we can be affected by. So it's just really important to be aware of how these changes can happen. And I think to lessen the guilt as parents. And some are just less resilient. They are more sensitive. So environmental possible causes of mental illness could be that children have learnt unhelpful coping mechanisms. So they've just seen how parents have acted to stress or difficulties in life, and they learn that that's how you react. A stressful life event such as moving house, school, exams, poverty, divorce, these can all be a single trigger that could perhaps trigger something that's already genetically in there but maybe hasn't come out. So that's how the environment, your nature nurture kind of interlinks. Parenting obviously has a massive impact. So if you're very punishing, very punitive, that can have an impact on the child's mental health. And if there's a lack of support for learning difficulties, and also there's many more, I've just picked out a few of the main ones. And then trauma has a massive impact on our children's brain development. So there could be a type of thing such as chronic injury or illness. They could have been bullied. They could have been abused or neglected. They could experience the death of a close relative or family friend, or there could be conflict in the home. So these are just some of the possible causes of mental illness. It's often difficult to say exactly what caused something. And like I say, there's often a mixture of nature nurture going on as well, just to complicate things. Right, so here are some risk factors, and these situations are shown to be correlated to poor mental health. So I mentioned earlier, lower household income poverty is massively related for all sorts of reasons, and often it's lack of access to support and resources as well. Parental mental illness, special educational needs, unhealthy family functioning, low levels of social support, a physical health condition, and being a member of the LGBTQ community. So just have a look at those things, and you know, they're just additional risk factors where it's, you know, research has shown that people in these situations are more likely to have difficulties with their mental health. Okay. Right, so just going to look through some key facts for you. So the latest statistical kind of survey was in 2017, which we think it was pre-COVID. So compared to now, this is actually massively different. And the rates are increasing all the time at an exponential rate, which is quite scary. But if we just look at these figures for a moment, 75% of mental illnesses start before the age of 18 years, excluding dementia. So most mental illness will start in our young people. And when we look at the brain changes, we can see why, can't we? 1 in 10 children in the UK have a mental disorder at any one time. So if you think of a classroom, that's at least 3 children. 1 in 25 to 19-year-olds have 2 or more individual mental disorders. And so that's, you know, not just struggling with one, but struggling with two. And often things like the neurodiversity will combine with something else. Somebody may have dyslexia, but because of that and the anxiety that creates at school, they've also got anxiety. So often these things, they're called comorbid, where you've got more than one or the other, and they link together and reinforce each other in negative ways. It's a very sad statistic. 52.7% of girls aged 5 to 19 with a mental disorder have self-harmed or attempted suicide. So basically that's half of girls, if they're struggling with mental illness, will have self-harmed or attempted suicide. And we know that boys are more likely to complete a suicide. The girls have more attempts, but the boys are more likely to complete. The total cost of mental ill health to UK economy is estimated at 105 billion per year, which is close to the entire NHS budget. So that's quite eye-watering, isn't it? And I just think that's why I want to do what I do, which is support parents and children, because we need to get in earlier to provide more support earlier. There's at the moment, I think we've got quite a reactive society where we're reacting to things, and we need to get in there sooner. So looking at these statistics, obviously, the most important thing to realise is that this is just recorded statistics. It's not all those people struggling alone at home where it's undiagnosed. The parents don't realise what it is. The young people don't even realise what's wrong. Many people don't go to see the doctor, or even if they do, it's not actually diagnosed. So it's sad to realise that these statistics are actually much higher than what's on this screen. Okay, so we'll just look through some common signs and symptoms. I think this is really helpful for parents to know what they might be looking for. And also it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes to know if it's just a phase of growing up that they're going through, or if it's actually something where you might want to go and get some more support and go see the doctor. So one thing I will say that it's normal, very normal for them to have highs and lows, to feel very down or sad, but then to come back up again. So it's when they stay in a very sad or low or anxious position, that they say at least 2 weeks in one go, that's when you might start to be getting a bit more concerned. Or if they're feeling sad or anxious, but there doesn't seem to be an obvious reason, you can't kind of pinpoint, if they've got an exam, then obviously, but if there's nothing going on and they seem to have that anxiety still there, you might want to go seek some support. So I'll just read through these signs and symptoms of mental illness. So significant tiredness, low energy, or problems sleeping. Withdrawal from friends and from activities. Extreme mood changes of high and lows. Excessive fears or worries, or extreme feelings of guilt. Confused thinking or reduced ability to concentrate. Feeling sad or down for long periods of time. Detachment from reality, delusions, which could be paranoia or hallucinations. Suicidal thinking, inability to cope with daily problems or stress, trouble understanding and relating situations and to people, problems with alcohol or drug use, major changes in eating habits, and excessive anger, hostility, or violence. So there's just some interesting things to look at, isn't there, to think. Maybe you're thinking about your children and looking at these and thinking, oh, I didn't realise that maybe that was, a symptom of mental illness, or maybe, there's a couple of these that are combining and you're thinking, actually, that you are concerned and maybe, you want to go and seek some more support. So I hope that's just helpful to kind of see what some of the common signs and symptoms are. Okay, I think it's important to note there are gender differences. So if you're a parent of children of different genders, that mental illness can manifest differently. So girls are far more common to have an emotional disorder. So things like depression and anxiety, they're your emotional disorders. So possibly a quarter of them might have an emotional disorder. And if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, that shows how boys and girls are different. So the boys are in the brown, the girls are in blue. And as you can see, at 5 to 10 years old, it's quite similar, the emotional disorder rates. But by 17 to 19, the girls are double of what the boys are. So that's massively different. 1.6% of girls were identified with an eating disorder, 5.6 with a body dysmorphic disorder. And that is where they are really focusing on one part of their body that they really dislike, so much so they might want surgery or do something quite radical about it. And the statistic I quoted earlier, which is that half of them with a mental disorder will have attempted suicide. So those are really sad statistics. And like I said, these are just the reported ones. So in actual fact, they're actually much higher. And post-COVID, they're also much higher. And in males, we usually see behavioural disorders. So that's things like ADHD and oppositional conduct disorder. But we know that it does occur in girls, and sometimes they mask it and that gets hidden. But just some things to, again, to be aware of. So what are some protective factors? How can we help our children? It's really important if they know they can ask for help. So I think it's really important to normalise when they're sad and upset. Obviously, we start when they're little. Say, oh, come talk to mummy, what's wrong? You know, are you feeling sad? And so they've developed that habit of being able to talk about their feelings, and that's an okay thing to do. That it's good to have feelings. It's an okay to have feelings, that they're normal, you know, and we all have highs and lows. So it's really important they know they can come to somebody and say, I'm struggling, that we don't shame them for that. We don't tell them to toughen up or life's not that bad, because whatever it is for them, it's their reality. And if it feels overwhelming and they can't cope, then that is how they feel. So there's no point saying to them, oh, you know, it's not that bad, because it is for them. So make sure they can ask for help. Another protective factor is to normalise mental illness. So like I mentioned earlier, have it be like a physical illness that you talk about at home. You know, you can talk about your feelings. I was feeling really anxious when I went to work today because I had to have an important interview. You know, so talk about these things so they know that happens. You know, I was feeling really sad for a long time because my father passed away, you know, for example. So just to normalise our emotions and mental illness, that it's okay to have mental illness like a physical illness. And that, so you can even say, you know, well, I had some depression, I went to see the doctor and I had some medication, and to be able to be comfortable with that, because I think that's quite difficult. So just as much as you can to normalise mental illness. Physical activity is really important. It's one of the proven ways to actually lift their emotional and mental well-being. Obviously, they get the natural highs of those hormones afterwards. They feel happier, and it's also linked into if they can do extracurricular activities. That's really important because it gives them that self-esteem, that sense of accomplishment. It gives them peers that they associate with. It gives them something outside of school. So I know it, you know, it's funny because my girls, you know, they all went through phases of dropping out of clubs, and, you know, it's really difficult to keep them in those extracurricular activities. But if you can get them interested in something, it's really, really good for them to have something else outside school, something that they're interested in, something that they enjoy, something to get them out of just the mundane life of going to school. Feeling heard and understood. So this is so important, but like I said, for asking for help. If they do talk to us, we need to take the time to listen. It's really, really important. We don't brush off their struggles. We don't minimize them. And as they're talking, you can say to them, it sounds like you're feeling really sad, or it sounds like you're feeling really overwhelmed. Help them to label those emotions, help them to normalize those emotions. And just by talking, they will feel better. There's something very cathartic about getting our feelings out. So if you just try to help them to feel understood, and to talk if they want to talk to you, don't force it, then yeah, that's really powerful for them. Obviously, positive family functioning. So we try to have a positive home environment, which is really difficult. We're all human. You know, we argue, but we try to be conscious of the impact on the family. Seek help if you've got you know, support around you from aunts and uncles, cousins, grandparents, parents. It's so important for them to have other people that they can talk to, because in adolescence, they don't want to talk to parents often. And so we need to make sure there's other people there. So that links really nicely into social support. So I think here is where the church is brilliant, because they have youth leaders to talk to. I had wonderful youth leaders. I was really lucky. And youth need those other adults to be role models, modeling the things that parents want them to do, but they don't want to listen to parents anymore. So providing them that social support, help them to know other adults they can talk to that are safe. So those are just a few things we can help to give them to be protective factors. Okay, so how can we support their mental health as parents? So 3 key things are looking after their physical body with good nutrition, sleep and exercise. And our physical and mental and emotional health all rolls around together. It's all wrapped up in one bundle. And so, you know, I'm sure you've felt when you've been really tired, how it's affected your feelings. Everything links together. So look at those 3 first, because if they're not eating right and they're not sleeping, they're not getting exercise, then they're probably not going to be able to operate very well and function. Getting outside is really important. The fresh air, in nature and in the sun, it's just so good for them. Try to help them to have fun music. Music's next, but I was just thinking, when my girls are a bit down, say put some good music on, you know, lift your spirits with music. Music's really powerful, so I love music. And maybe they play music, which is brilliant, instrument. Get them to do their arts and hobbies that they like. Lots of these things are activities where they can get lost in them, and that's really important. It's really important they can get out of their heads for a moment and do an activity where they're not thinking. So for me, for example, that's exercise. I love doing exercise class. I stop thinking about my worries and I'm just focused on what I'm doing, and that just gives us a bit of a mental and emotional break. Help them to spend time with friends is so important to them, and journaling is another good thing, because as they write down their thoughts and feelings, that again helps to get them out, helps them to process them and make sense of them, helps them to put things in perspective, helps them see how things change over time. So these are all just some little things that you can do as parents to just help to support their mental health. Okay, so what do adolescents really need? And this is one of our big, I kind of guess, summary slides of what is the most important for us to offer them. So acceptance is really important. Like I said earlier, they need that love, that understanding of it being a difficult time for them. So we're less critical and just accepting of what they're going through in this process. And a big part of that is unconditional positive regard. And I think if you think to yourself, when your kids were little and they went to school and they came out, and you would just have this glowing face and they would have this glowing face, and you run towards each other and hug, and that changes, doesn't it, as they get older? You know, you're lucky if you get looked at, you probably get a grunt or a grimace. So do you look at your children with pleasure? You know, do you look at them like you cherish them? And it can be really hard when they are rejecting us and when they don't talk to us and they're quite nasty. So just try to think of ways where you can really show them this unconditional positive regard, that you think highly of them no matter what, that you offer them that unconditional love. And I think that we can communicate that in different ways as they get older. I'll often message my girls rather than trying to talk. They respond quite well to texts, because talking can be quite a bit just too much for them, too invasive. Okay, so we need to offer them empathy and understanding. So really trying to understand their experience, not looking at it from our angle, but really understanding how they're thinking about it. So we can ask some questions to do this, understand, you know, tell me more about that. How is that experience for you? And really show them you understand. Give them opportunities for novelty and exploration, like we said. And obviously this is, you know, it doesn't always have to cost money, because you think, oh, I haven't got the money to do things like that. But, you know, you can build a den in the back garden, go somewhere completely new you haven't been before, let them map read and tell you the way to go. Just try to think of ways to give them the opportunity to make decisions. Boundaries and independence, and it's funny because those two go together. So they do need boundaries. They need them to be clear, consistent and fair, because as they will fight against them. They hate things being unfair, as I'm sure you're aware. And encourage that independence through those boundaries, encourage them to make their own choices, which leads into choices, isn't it, and natural consequences. I think it's really important that we allow the natural consequences to follow. Sometimes we gently point them out. But yes, so allow them to make choices and start to experience real life, because if we protect them from them, that's not actually helping them to grow up and prepare to be adults. And so our adolescents need adults who are genuine, who can apologize, who model behavior and who love them. That's what they need from us. Okay. Right, so very quickly at the end, I just want to show you a slide. I originally presented this to young women leaders, and I wanted them to be prepared for when youth came to them and disclosed something that was obviously difficult for them at that time. And I want to just give you the skills to know what to say, so that if your young person does come to you, you know, it's that a first response is what they're going to remember, isn't it? So it's really important to try to respond in an accepting, loving way. So we'll just really quickly go through this slide. Now, first of all, I obviously talked about safeguarding because these are leaders and not parents. So if you are a leader listening, make sure you're somewhere where you can be private, but it's not secret. So have another leader in sight, let somebody else know that you're going to talk to somebody, that maybe the young person wants to bring a friend with them or just outside the door. So keep safeguarding in mind always. And then just really listen, try not to talk, just respond, yeah, you know, so they know you are listening, eye contact, you know, you're totally engaged in what they're saying. And you can repeat back to them, oh, right, so you're really struggling at school at the moment. Tell me more about this teacher that you're not liking. And so they really know that you listen and you're engaged, and just focus on their conversation. Don't try to give them advice at this point. Don't try to steer it, just let them lead. So really listen. And then we show understanding. So this is where we might paraphrase what they've said. Oh, sorry, so at school, you're really struggling with this teacher because she seems to be telling you off and it's not, you know, you haven't done anything wrong. And then you can label an emotion. So that sounds really frustrating, or you sound really angry. You know, so you stay with them in that moment and really show you understand. So we listen, we repeat back what they've said, we paraphrase the main part of the conversation, and we help them to label an emotion of how they're feeling. So we're really listening, we're understanding. And then at the end of the conversation, thank them for talking to you, acknowledge how brave they've been. It really does take courage to talk to somebody, reassure them they're not alone. And so I want to just focus on these three things here: that I'm here, I care, and I understand. And when looking at suicide statistics and talking to young people about why they commit suicide, it's mostly because they feel alone and they feel misunderstood, and they just want to end the pain of how they're feeling. They usually don't want to die, they just don't want to feel pain anymore. And when they feel alone and overwhelmed, it just gets too much. So help them to feel like you're there, that they're not alone anymore. Just by talking to you, they'll feel that they're not alone. So you're here, I'm here, you can talk to me anytime, thank you for coming to me, I really care about you and I understand what you're going through, and I'll support you, I'm here, you know. So I just want to share that with you because it's really important as parents and leaders that if somebody does come to us, that we get this right. You know, don't try to share too much advice, just be there, just listen to them, make sure they don't feel alone anymore, make sure they feel understood. So just be that trusted other person. Okay, I think we've reached the end. Let me just double check. Any questions? So let me come out of here and stop sharing so I can see you all.